I have no ability to assess risk. The anxiety disorder lurking in my brain has completely broken it, and I've been doing this for so long, my flight or fight response kicks in so often, that I can now sit with the panic and still maintain a semblance of clarity in my brain. I can almost disassociate for a moment and analyze the physical feelings like a clinician. I still can't assess the risk, but I can observe myself and have this moment where I say, okay, this is happening again, respond accordingly. I'm telling you all of this because that part of my brain has been on overdrive since election night, and this is a weird one to sit with because my own inability to assess the risk we're all facing seems to be reflected in our population. There's people out there that voted for all of this and they're feeling no risk. In fact, they're happy with everything that's going on. And then on the other side of things, I've heard plenty of people say that we are currently living in a fascist dictatorship and we all need to either flee the country or rebel before we're murdered wholesale. This is not great for someone like myself who's already riddled with anxiety. I dread waking up and checking the news for fear that today is the day when whatever inciting incident that seems inevitable actually happens. But at the same token, it may never come. Just this constant state of limbo day in and day out, and it's been ripping me apart. It's hard to find the motivation to accomplish anything when a non-insignificant portion of my brain believes I'm going to be disappeared by the government in the next few hours or days or weeks. But I am seeing a trend, and maybe this is just my bloated Lovecraftian algorithm feeding me this, of people seeming to feel like the safe answer is hopelessness. And I totally understand that. I often find that hopelessness is one of the greatest comforts you can have, particularly in a situation like this where we have such little control. The only control you can assert is over your emotions. If you expect the worst, then when it comes knocking at your door, the bet is, at least, that you'll find some peace in your self-awareness. The problem with this hive of hopelessness that seems to be making the rounds is that it oftentimes becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you stand at the pulpit of despair and start preaching, you're bound to convert a person or two. And this is dreadfully dangerous because the people trying to enact this authoritarian takeover of our government peddle in hopelessness. It is their path to victory. If we are all so downtrodden and apathetic that we paralyze our ability to fight back, then they win without having to lift a finger. We essentially hand them the ball game. And so I suppose the question here is, what is there to be hopeful about? Because it sure as shit doesn't seem like there is anything, and I strongly feel that. I strongly feel hopeless, but I hearken back to my broken risk assessment. See, the way I deal with my inability to evaluate risk is by completely not trusting myself. I'm not a reliable narrator. My judgment can't be trusted in these moments of high anxiety or panic because my brain is so far gone. So what I have to do is look outside myself for some kind of third-party evidence that my thinking is aberrant. And I know I run into a sort of built-in redundancy here that my own unreliable perspective is now going to be tasked with the interpretation of my surroundings, but I have to just live with that reality. And so if I view my hopelessness as also coming from an unreliable narrator, then are there some third-party happenings that contradict this innate feeling? And as it so happens, there actually are. And before I say any of this, I need to strongly stress that the situation we are in is in fact dire. These feelings of fear and dread and hopelessness aren't just the products of aberrant thinking as often my anxiety is. We do have rooted, grounded reasons to feel fear. I say that because I don't want to be selling you copium here. I don't want to lull you into a false sense of comfort that, like feeling abjectly hopeless, leads you into a state of inaction. We are facing the greatest threat to our representative democracy that we have ever felt in our lifetimes. Do not for 1 second think we aren't, okay? But when I look at where we are right now and try to analog it to other historical times like Germany in the 30s or the Iranian Cultural Revolution or Mao's China, one of the things that makes this almost incomparable, and you might think what I'm about to say is really stupid, but bear with me, is the existence of social media. Like, how often do you hear that German citizens who lived next to concentration camps didn't know what was going on? I don't know the veracity of that statement, but that's not remotely possible in today's world. Every decision the current administration is making is broadcast across hundreds of news organizations and thousands of pages online within minutes. Fascism thrives in darkness, and that's just not possible in our country. These students being abducted by ICE are things that in regimes of the past would be be unseen by the populace, but we're seeing them happen in real time. There is immense power in our ability to be so interconnected, not just in spreading information, but our ability to organize. And even if these corporate platforms are taken down, censored, whatever the case may be, we will still have this technological infrastructure to maintain communication. That is an extremely powerful tool that didn't exist until very recently. And you would think that this administration has an amazing opportunity to mass censor social media with the public's approval through the ban of TikTok. But they seem to be on board with letting TikTok continue to operate. And this brings me to my next point of things we can find some hope in. Incompetence. This administration is beyond incompetent. They don't know how to run a functioning government. The Signal chat leak is such a highly distilled example of how poor their entire decision-making process is. It's a combination of bald ineptitude and brazen arrogance. And I know you might say that's because they don't care. They're just flaunting their authoritarianism in our faces. And they might think they're doing that. But on the back end, on the legislative end, they're kind of falling apart. I know this onslaught of executive orders is terrifying, but you have to remember what an executive order is. It is essentially the president telling the executive branch what he wants them to look into and try and accomplish. It isn't a law. It isn't a royal decree. He can tell them to start a unicorn breeding program, but if they can't do it, they're just going to say okay and move on. And time and again, this administration's executive orders are being challenged both by Democratic representatives and also in the courts. Trump has said a lot, but he hasn't accomplished a fraction of what he's decreed. These executive orders read more like a tactic to scare the shit out of the populace and keep us in this state of paralyzed inaction. They can talk about dismantling government agencies and consolidating elections and impeaching judges, but so far it has been mostly just talk, just the blustering of incompetent men struggling to enact their fantasy world of evangelical authoritarianism. Our institutions, for now, are weathering their incompetence. And I'm not saying that's going to last forever. I'm not trying to downplay how insane it is that a sitting president is trying to destroy our system of checks and balances, but to treat his attempts as being inevitable successes undermines how incompetent this administration has been at accomplishing anything. You have to remember that he didn't win in this fictional landslide he's claiming. He didn't cross a 50% majority of the popular vote. About 30% of the population voted for this, and what they voted for was rooted in a worldwide trend of nations voting out incumbent parties due to the economic effects of COVID. And we are already seeing the evidence of this playing out. There was a special election in a PA state Senate race that went 15 points to Trump in the last election, and a Democrat flipped that seat. Trump's congressional majority is so thin, he just pulled a New York congresswoman's appointment to the UN because he fears losing one single seat, and that is in a safe red district. What I'm saying here is that we are facing the largest crisis this country has ever faced, at least since the Civil War. The current admin is absolutely trying to erode our rights and create an authoritarian state, but to believe their success is inevitable is foolish. Yes, it would be nice if the Democratic Party would put together a more cogent and visible strategy to fight them, but don't let their failures feed into your hopelessness. Things are bad, but allowing their campaign of fear to paralyze you accomplishes nothing. Language is such an important tool in this fight. We can't allow our language to be so hopeless that we create the conditions we fear. Cultural shifts often happen in subtle changes of perspective. If you wake up every day to some new executive order and believe it's a law already being enacted, and then you go online and the rhetoric is fire and brimstone treating that executive order like it's been codified by every branch of government, your perspective is going to be washed in fear and hopelessness. But if you try to see these people as who they are, as small, weak, incompetent men with such a slim majority that the only chance they have of getting anything done is by exploiting executive orders, then maybe your perspective can shift. Maybe we can push back a bit harder, and maybe we can stop treating this attempted authoritarian takeover as a thing of fate and more as a challenge that we will rise to face and defeat.